In an era dominated by hyperconnectivity, where constant noise has become the norm, isolation emerges not as an imposition, but as a deep call of the soul. This call, whispered through the millennia by mystics and contemplatives, resonates today with renewed urgency. Isolation, far from being an escape from the world, represents a journey to the center of being, where true transformations happen. Jacobo Grinberg, in his pioneering studies on consciousness, proposed the existence of a universal matrix of information that permeates all reality. This matrix, according to him, becomes more accessible when we allow ourselves to slow down and silence the mental whirlwind that characterizes our daily experience. Voluntary isolation in this context acts as a portal to more subtle dimensions of consciousness. Contemplative traditions have long recognized the transformative power of solitude. The Desert Fathers in early Christianity sought in the arid vastness not an escape, but a profound encounter with the divine. Buddhist monks retreat to remote monasteries not to flee the world, but to understand it in its deepest essence. This ancient wisdom finds validation today in the discoveries of modern neuroscience. Contemporary studies demonstrate that periods of voluntary isolation can induce significant changes in brain activity, particularly in areas associated with self-awareness and emotional regulation. It's as if the brain, liberated from the constant bombardment of external stimuli, could finally access more refined states of processing and integration. The initial discomfort that many experience during isolation is a natural part of the process. Our mind, conditioned to perpetual stimulation, initially resists silence. It's like an agitated lake that needs to calm its waters to clearly reflect the sky above. This period of adaptation signals the beginning of a profound reorganization of consciousness. The universality of isolation as a transformative practice transcends cultures and eras. We find its echoes in the shamanic practices of the Americas, in the yogic retreats of the Himalayas, in the Sufi khalwas of the desert. This convergence suggests that isolation touches something fundamental in the human psyche, something that Grinberg described as a reconnection with the fundamental neuronal field. Modern science has shed light on the neurobiological mechanisms that underlie the transformative experiences of voluntary isolation. This chapter explores how the human brain responds and adapts to prolonged periods of contemplation and reduction of external stimuli, revealing the neural substrates of consciousness transformation. Neuroimaging research has demonstrated significant alterations in brain activity during deep contemplative states. The prefrontal cortex, a region associated with self-awareness and emotional regulation, exhibits unique activation patterns during voluntary isolation. This neural reorganization may explain the historical accounts of mental clarity and profound insights experienced by contemplative practitioners. Stanislav Grof, a pioneer in the study of non-ordinary states of consciousness, identified how isolation can catalyze transpersonal experiences, moments when individual perception transcends conventional ego boundaries. These experiences, far from being merely subjective, leave measurable marks on brain activity, suggesting a profound reorganization of neural circuits. Grinberg's neuronal field theory finds surprising resonance in recent discoveries about brain plasticity. Just as Grinberg proposed a universal matrix of information, contemporary research reveals that our brain possesses a remarkable capacity for reorganization and adaptation, especially under conditions of reduced external stimuli. During voluntary isolation, a significant decrease in the activity of the default mode network, a set of brain regions active when we're not focused on specific tasks, is observed. This reduction is associated with elevated states of presence and mental clarity, corroborating historical accounts from mystics and contemplatives about the special quality of consciousness during isolation. Studies with experienced meditation practitioners show lasting alterations in brain structure, including increased gray matter density in regions associated with attention and emotional regulation. These changes suggest that conscious isolation can induce lasting neuroplastic transformations, literally reshaping the brain through contemplative practice. Neurophenomenology, an approach developed by Francisco Varela, offers a valuable theoretical framework for understanding the relationship between neurobiological changes and subjective experience during isolation. This integrative perspective suggests that transformations of consciousness are not merely epiphenomena of brain activity, but reflect a fundamental reorganization of the relationship between mind, brain, and experience. Voluntary isolation acts as a mirror reflecting the depths of our psyche. When we withdraw from the whirlwind of external interactions and stimuli, aspects of our being that often remain hidden in the hustle and bustle of everyday life emerge. This process, although challenging, offers a unique opportunity for psychological development and personality integration. Carl Jung, in his studies on the process of individuation, emphasized the importance of moments of introversion and solitude for psychic development. During isolation, the psyche naturally initiates a process of reorganization, bringing to the surface contents of the unconscious that demand our attention and integration. It's as if the outer silence created the necessary space for inner voices to finally be heard. Transpersonal psychology, developed by researchers like Stanislav Grof and Ken Wilber, offers a valuable theoretical framework for understanding the transformations that occur during voluntary isolation. According to this perspective, human consciousness possesses levels or frequency bands that transcend common ego-centered experience. Isolation can act as a catalyst for accessing these expanded states of consciousness. This process directly dialogues with Jacobo Grinberg's observations on the nature of consciousness. According to his neuronal field theory, our ordinary perception of reality is only a fraction of the total potential of our consciousness. Isolation, by reducing sensory and social overload, allows more subtle layers of perception and understanding to emerge. During prolonged periods of isolation, many people report a gradual dissolution of conventional ego boundaries. This experience, which can initially be uncomfortable, often leads to profound insights about the interconnected nature of reality. It's as if physical withdrawal from the social world allowed a paradoxical approach to the universal essence of consciousness. Abraham Maslow's pioneering work on peak experiences offers another valuable perspective on the psychological states that can emerge during voluntary isolation. These experiences, characterized by a profound sense of unity and transcendence, frequently occur in moments of contemplative solitude. The psychological dimension of isolation also involves a process of emotional purification, something that contemplative traditions have long recognized. Repressed emotions, unprocessed memories, and unconscious behavioral patterns naturally emerge during prolonged periods of solitude. This process, although sometimes challenging, is fundamental for psychological integration and personal growth. Conscious isolation requires more than simply being physically alone. It demands a structured approach and specific practices that enhance its transformative benefits. This chapter explores an integrated set of techniques and methodologies developed by both ancestral traditions and contemporary researchers. Meditation emerges as an essential foundation of conscious isolation. Contemplative traditions have developed specific techniques over millennia to work with the mind during periods of seclusion. Mindfulness, for example, cultivates a quality of attention that allows observing the movements of consciousness without excessive identification, creating an internal space of clarity and discernment. Grinberg, in his studies with Mexican shamans, documented how specific attention techniques can significantly alter our perception of reality. During isolation, these practices become particularly potent, as there is no constant interference from external stimuli that might dilute their effect. The researcher observed that certain practices of silence and contemplation allowed practitioners to access what he called synergic structures of consciousness. Conscious bodywork represents another crucial aspect of transformative isolation. Practices such as yoga, qigong, or contemplative movements help maintain balance between introspection and embodiment. The body, as phenomenology teaches, is not just an object, but our primary means of being in the world. During isolation, refined body awareness serves as an anchor for present experience. The practice of fasting, both alimentary and digital, can significantly intensify the effects of isolation. Temporary reduction of consumption not only clears the mind, but can also induce altered states of consciousness that facilitate profound insights and transformations. It is important, however, that these practices be carried out with proper guidance and respecting individual limits. Dream work represents another important dimension of conscious isolation. During periods of seclusion, dream life often intensifies, bringing important messages from the unconscious. Recording and reflecting on dreams, a practice that Jung considered fundamental for psychic development, can significantly enrich the isolation experience. Contemplative writing or journaling offers a valuable tool for processing and integrating the experiences that emerge during isolation. The act of writing not only helps organize thoughts and emotions, but can also reveal patterns and insights that would otherwise remain hidden. Grinberg emphasized the importance of detailed recording of altered states of consciousness experiences. Paradoxically, voluntary isolation, although it may seem like a withdrawal from the social dimension, can lead to a deeper understanding of our inherently relational nature. This apparent paradox illuminates a fundamental aspect of human consciousness. Our individuality exists within a larger matrix of connections and relationships. Grinberg's neuronal field theory offers a unique perspective on this phenomenon. According to his view, individual consciousness is not an isolated entity, but a node within a universal network of information and meaning. Isolation, in this context, can be understood as a temporary reconfiguration of our connections with this larger matrix, allowing a clearer perception of our fundamental interdependence. Contemplative traditions have long recognized this paradoxical dimension of isolation. Buddhist monasteries, for example, are communities structured around the practice of silence and introspection. Individual isolation happens within a social context that supports and gives it meaning. This community structure provides a valuable model for understanding how isolation can serve not only individual development, but also the evolution of collective consciousness. Contemporary studies in social neuroscience are beginning to validate these ancient intuitions. Research demonstrates that periods of voluntary isolation can increase our empathic sensitivity and ability to tune into others' mental states. It's as if temporary distancing allows us to develop a more refined form of social perception. The social dimension of isolation also manifests in how individual transformative experiences can positively impact communities. When a person emerges from a period of conscious isolation with greater clarity and understanding, this personal growth naturally influences their relationships and social interactions. Like ripples in a lake, individual transformation reverberates through the social fabric. Human history is replete with narratives of transformation through voluntary isolation. From ancient mystics to contemporary practitioners, we find consistent accounts of how periods of seclusion can catalyze profound changes in consciousness and perception of reality. This chapter examines specific cases that illustrate the transformative power of conscious isolation. A notable example comes from Grinberg's studies with Don Lucio, a Mexican shaman who undertook long periods of isolation as part of his training. During these seclusions, Don Lucio reported experiences of expanded consciousness that transcended ordinary limitations of time and space. These experiences were not mere hallucinations, but altered states of consciousness that allowed access to deeper levels of understanding and perception. Contemporary research on meditation retreats provides scientific evidence of the transformative effects of structured isolation. Longitudinal studies with practitioners of long retreats show significant changes in markers of psychological well-being, brain function, and even gene expression. These findings suggest that voluntary isolation can induce profound alterations not only in consciousness, but also in the practitioner's very biology. The case of Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk and influential author, offers another powerful example. His writings on the experience of monastic isolation reveal how contemplative solitude can lead to profound insights about the nature of consciousness and reality. Merton described how isolation gradually dissolves the superficial layers of the ego, allowing a more direct and authentic experience of existence. Contemporary retreat experiences also provide valuable data. A recent study with participants in a 30-day retreat documented significant transformations in the perception of self and reality. Participants reported a decrease in obsessive internal dialogue, a greater sense of connection with the whole, and profound insights into personal and relational patterns. The convergence between the insights of contemplative traditions and the discoveries of modern science offers a unique perspective on the transformative potential of isolation. This integration not only validates ancestral practices, but also opens new horizons for understanding human consciousness. Neurophenomenology, developed by Francisco Varela, provides a valuable theoretical framework for this integration. By combining the rigor of scientific investigation with the richness of subjective experience, this approach allows a more complete understanding of the states of consciousness that emerge during voluntary isolation. Grinberg's studies on the neuronal field anticipated many of the contemporary discoveries about the interconnected nature of consciousness. His vision of a universal matrix of information finds surprising parallels in current scientific theories about the nature of quantum reality and the emergence of consciousness. Research on meditation and contemplative states has grown exponentially in recent decades, providing empirical evidence of the benefits of conscious isolation. Studies using advanced neuroimaging technologies reveal how contemplative practices can induce measurable changes in brain structure and function. This convergence between science and spirituality suggests that we are entering a new era of understanding human consciousness. Voluntary isolation, practiced for millennia as a path to inner transformation, can now be understood both through the lens of subjective experience and objective scientific investigation. As we advance into the 21st century, voluntary isolation emerges as an increasingly relevant practice for the development of human consciousness. In a world characterized by digital hyperconnectivity and sensory overload, the ability to consciously withdraw to spaces of silence and introspection becomes not only valuable but essential. Grinberg's discoveries about the neuronal field and their implications for the expansion of consciousness continue to inspire new directions of research and practice. The integration of modern technologies with ancestral isolation practices opens fascinating possibilities for the future of consciousness exploration. Voluntary isolation, understood as a technology for the expansion of consciousness, can play a crucial role in the evolution of humanity. As we face global challenges that require higher levels of collective consciousness, the ability to access expanded states of perception through conscious isolation becomes a vital tool for our individual and collective transformation. New modalities of practice are emerging, combining ancient wisdom with contemporary understandings. Hybrid retreats that integrate traditional contemplative practices with neurophysiological monitoring offer unique opportunities to deepen our understanding of altered states of consciousness. The journey we've explored in this text is not just an academic study or scientific investigation, it's an invitation to profound transformation through the power of conscious isolation. Grinberg's discoveries, combined with insights from contemplative traditions and validations from modern science, point to a largely unexplored potential of human consciousness. The future of expanded consciousness is not a distant destination, but a present possibility that reveals itself through the practice of conscious isolation. As more people discover and explore this path, new dimensions of human experience open up, promising a continuous evolution of our understanding of what it means to be conscious and alive in this vast universe of possibilities.